So now I want to talk about Europe for a bit. And what I want to talk about is that Europe is facing the same threat as the US is at the moment. That the 1% are working to take over government. But it's not as far advanced as in the US. I think what has protected us are two things. First, we have parliaments with many parties. So it's not easy to buy all the politicians and all the parties to control government. And secondly, European governments have restrained from borrowing as much as the US has. There are still European countries which are doing well, which have a debt GDP ratio of minus 100. And so we still have enough wealth. The governments, not all of them, France is practically broke, and Greece was broke, and Germany is going to borrow a shitload of money. So we're declining, and Europe is going down the slippery slope, but it's not as bad as it could be yet. And also with the 1% buying and dominating the political parties, well, first of all, we have too many of them, so that is very difficult. And as you know, the 1%, they influence politicians and parties in two ways. One, they buy them, and then second, they blackmail them. So they make sure that no politician comes to power who doesn't have a secret file or has been to Epstein's island, or, they have something compromising on them. If you are rich or powerful or influential, then there's somebody, at least 1%, who has some dirt on you, so they can blackmail you. So one way in which the 1% are trying to take over political power in Europe, is by or through the far right-wing parties. They fund these parties, they own these parties, they have the dirt on the politicians, of course. They basically own the right-wing parties, and they spend a lot of money on the media and all kinds of propaganda and trolls on the internet, etc., to get as much votes as possible, so they can influence every parliament in Europe. And they've actually taken over parliament in some countries, like Italy with Meloni, Hungary. They had Poland, which resisted them, and they have a very tenuous democratic government right now. I hope they will survive, because the Peace Party, what's in the name? At least the right wing is still very influential in Poland. They own a lot of judges, and lower level politicians. They own the media, etc. So it's a struggle. And then in Germany, you have the AfD. So when you realize that Musk is part of the 1% who are trying to take over all democratic governments by supporting the far right, then it is totally logical that he supports the AfD in Germany, and that Trump loves Meloni in Italy. On the other hand, Trump loves every good-looking woman, so that's no big surprise. But they're all in the same boat. All these right-wing politicians, they make a lot of money by spouting their message of hate and anger. And they all have these Swiss bank accounts and whatever, and they have limitless resources to influence people. And everybody's saying, oh, in Europe, why are the right-wing parties winning in Europe these past years? And the answer is very simple. They have the most money, and they're supported by the 1% who own the media, who own the internet, who own all the communications channels everywhere. So it's no surprise that to me that the far right is winning. But apart from the money that is provided them, the right-wing parties are selling something that people want to buy. They have a message of xenophobia, of fear, and of hate. And they just, it's a fear of strangers. It is fear of Islam. It is hate of strangers. It is hate of Islam. And that it is just so easy to manipulate people through their basic emotions and their basic fears. And we are descendants of apes, and apes have this basic psychological makeup, which makes us fear strangers, which makes us fear whoever is not in our group, the others. And we hate change, conservatism is a very strong political power, because it just feeds directly into our basic makeup, our basic psychological makeup. So it is very easy to manipulate people through anger and fear. And companies have been doing this for a long time, because it turns out that if people are angry, they buy more. They consume more, they buy stuff, and they buy your bullshit, and they buy the stories. So what you need to do is make people very afraid, which will, because fear and anger just feed on each other. And all these emotions make them vote for the far right. It is a very simple psychological manipulation, and that people fall for it. It's stupid, basically, to let yourself be manipulated by rich people in such a way that you vote for their politicians. Because what is the goal of the rich people? Well, it's very simple: to get even more rich and to get more power. More wealth, more power. How do you achieve that? Well, don't pay taxes, and don't be regulated, and don't be held accountable for what you do. And as long as they're not accountable, they can pollute the environment, they can exploit Labor, they can do whatever they want because they own the politicians and the government, and because there's only one power, one institution in the world that can um, take power from the rich and use it for the people, and that is the power of the people. And what is the power of the people? A democratic government. And we're all divided. So the far right is urged, has a very strong policy, and the 1% have a very strong policy of breaking up the European Union, because divided you fall. And the European Union should actually unite, make it into a federal state. And if you actually look at the wealth, the money, the resources, and the population, when you look at the world and they call it unipolar geopolitics. They say, well, you have two powers in the world, the American group power and the Chinese affiliated power. So you have two polar powers, and after World War I, there was only one superpower, which was the United States. And about 10 years ago, China became a power, and because of the war in Ukraine, which through the sanctions allowed them to take over Russia, and they are the deciding factor in the BRICS and the BRICS financial system. So there are actually, right now, there are two superpowers in the world, which are the United States and China. But to be perfectly honest, the United States is putting an axe to its own ship and sinking. So we need to disconnect ourselves from that sinking ship. But Europe, if it were united, if it were federated, it would actually be a superpower. And there will be 3 superpowers in the world: the US, the EU, and China. And since the US is destroying itself, there will be only 2 powers: the European Union and China. Now, if the EU was smart, because the US is going down, even if they put all hands on deck, they'll probably have at least an internal financial crisis and an economic crash. And all of we, like the European Union, but also Canada, Australia, Japan, so need to cut our losses. And if the European Union were to ally itself and make alliances with the Commonwealth and Japan, because we already have this wonderful organization called the Commonwealth, which includes Britain, Canada, Australia, and the former colonies of Britain. So you already have an organization. So if you strengthen the Commonwealth and the European Union allies itself and intensifies its trade I've got the word. Uh, if they work more closely together, and if the European Union would offer the Commonwealth a sort of alliance, EU membership of the EU light, or the very intense alliance, then actually the European Union, together with the Commonwealth, would be the superpower in the world, and China will be second. And I think that will be a wonderful thing, because we have democracy, we have civil rights, we have human rights. People who live in European and Commonwealth countries have a wonderful life, and I wish everybody in the world would have this wonderful life that we have, in wealth, in prosperity, and in safety. Because if Europe just unites more and has their own defense systems, which they already do, we don't need the Americans. Really, for the European does not need the Americans for defense, because yes, the European army, well, I wouldn't really call it an army, but a loose association of different armies and NATO countries. You see, we don't need that much. NATO needs a huge amount of money and a huge amount of resources, because they wage war 5,000 miles away, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. We're waging war all over the world, and that is a logistical nightmare. And you need a lot and it costs a lot of money. But Europe just needs enough tanks and soldiers and drones and airplanes and missiles to defend itself against Russia, because who else is going to invade Europe? It's even not likely that Russia will invade us, but we can very easily defend ourselves, and we only need armed forces which are equipped to defend ourselves and our territory. We do not need an army that can fight wars in Afghanistan. We don't. So we're fine with the tanks and the missiles and the nuclear missiles and the fighter jets and whatever we have right now. We have enough to defend ourselves. And actually, if we would allow Ukraine to use mid-range and long-range ballistic missiles and bomb Moscow, this war could be over in 24 hours. It's that simple. And but you need to remember that the 1% rule Russia. They rule all the oligarchies and tyrannies in the world, because you can simply buy a dictator. That's easy, to win democratic election and put your politician in power. That takes time and effort and money. But if you want to own a country like Venezuela or Russia, all you have to do is buy the rich. And in Russia, they were already the people in power are the 1%. Putin and his oligarchic, minions, really, they're already part of the 1%. So when Putin and Trump talk to each other, they're all part of the 1%. So we need to stop thinking in countries and borders, because we need to think in who is part of the 1% and is ruled directly by the 1%, and which is ruled indirectly, and the US is becoming directly ruled through Trump, but can still save its democracy. And Europe and the Commonwealth is influenced by the 1%, but not owned by the 1%. We still have sort of independent politicians. And what we need to do in Europe, first of all, is become a federation, work together, align ourselves with like-minded people and countries like Canada and Australia. So basically the Commonwealth. Just make treaties between the EU and Commonwealth to intensify all our relationships, and ignore the US. The US is already gone. It's broke. It's already broke. It's it's the Wile Coyote situation, where the coyote has already run over the cliff. He's already running in space, and he hasn't realized it yet. And then in the cartoon, at some point he looks down and he sees the abyss, and then he falls down. So right now, the US is in a Wile E. Coyote moment where it's already past the cliff. He's already running on air, but he hasn't looked down yet. But we need to work together, form an alliance, and totally ignore the US. We need to cut our losses, because that ship is sinking. Cut our losses, cut off, work together, and become actually the major superpower in the world, together with China. And I think the values and the democracy and the civil rights and human rights and the independent courts of Europe and the Commonwealth are precious. And I'm so glad to be living in Europe and being part of this wealthy democracy. And I wish the whole world could live in such a wonderful place. And yes, of course, we can do better. We need to fend off the 1%, and we need to tax the wealthy, and we need to do antitrust and break up the big companies. But actually, the European Union is already working on antitrust, already has some antitrust legislation. They're fining the big tech. They're trying to break up the big tech. They're working on programs and projects to stimulate free-sourced software, so we can stop being dependent on. My microphone just cut out. Okay.